Hello, my name is David. I've made this video to share what I think is a pretty neat method to confidently deal with web browser cookies. I'll call it the Cookie Monster solution. I think of cookies as being roughly analogous to digital tattoos in your browser, which record your web surfing activity. When you access a website for the first time in a web browser such as Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge or Apple Safari, you're typically challenged with a cookie acknowledgement prompt along the lines of accept all cookies or configure browser settings, akin to what is displayed on the screen now. They're all presented with slightly different wording, but all say essentially the same thing. The saying dull as ditch water springs to mind. I'd hazard a guess that there isn't a user anywhere who reads and absorbs the information being conveyed. I certainly don't have any inclination to read them. In the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to describe and then demonstrate a simple yet safe way of dealing with this cookie monster burden. Before going any further, I need to provide a little balance to the negative impression I'm giving about browser cookies, as they do have an entirely valid and useful purpose. For websites which you repeatedly access, cookies are helpful in remembering settings and preferences such as your last viewed shopping item or the location you've picked for weather forecasts. Cookies are used to keep a record of having previously logged on to a website, such that you don't need to go through the full authentication process again. Cookies are also useful in remembering any personalization you've configured on websites you've accessed, such as layout style and content preferences. So, for websites which you trust and use regularly, cookies provide significant benefits. However, for websites which you've not previously viewed and are unlikely to ever again, cookies can become a privacy burden. The recording of personalised data such as age, gender and location can be a nuisance, or even a menace. I'll expand a little on the cookie choices you're typically given. One option is configure browser settings. Clicking on this often results in a barrage of technical jargon that's different for every website accessed, and only a realistic proposition for technically proficient users. Then there's the accept all cookies option, which feels like a lazy and insecure approach, and hence to be avoided for websites that you're unfamiliar with. The cookie challenge could be stated simply as a choice between a rock and a hard place. I'm going to describe a pragmatic approach which facilitates the simplicity of selecting accept all cookies while maintaining a satisfactory security posture. The solution I propose is to use two different browsers for web surfing activity. You designate the browser which you currently use, say Chrome or Safari or Edge, as your primary browser. This browser will be used to access everyday sites which you're familiar with for banking, email, shopping and social media, etc. I then recommend installing an additional browser which I designate as a secondary or temporary use browser. This browser will be used for accessing new websites and performing web searches. The secondary browser will be configured as the default browser, such that web surfing activity that's initiated outside of your browser, such as web links in social media applications or emails, open in it. It'd have its security and privacy settings configured to ensure that all web browsing material, such as history and cookies, are deleted each time it's closed. While surfing with this secondary browser, it's empowering when presented with the cookie acknowledgement prompt by every new website to know that it's fine to click the accept button without giving it much more thought. Here's a lame analogy I'll try to convey with a serious face. The knowledge that browsing history and cookies will be purged is a tiny bit like the feeling you might have in knowing that your car was going to be washed and valeted every evening. This would make any lunchtime snacking experience of dropping bits of sandwich in the footwell or biscuit crumbs on the seats something to easily dismiss, given your knowledge that it will be pristine again the next morning. This dual browser advice is platform agnostic. By this I mean that it's applicable for desktop or laptop computers, mobile phones and tablets, and also independent of whether you use Windows or Apple or Google or anything else. My next task is to demonstrate how using two browsers works in practice. I myself have settled on using Firefox as my primary browser. So, here we go. I'm starting up Firefox as my primary browser. On the toolbar there are some bookmarks which I'll use in this demonstration. The purpose of this exercise is to illustrate how cookies have valid purposes and show that my regular web surfing behaviour isn't impacted at all. Firstly, I'll click on the BBC Weather bookmark. I'll then select the location field, where I can now see that my home location was previously set and also some of my most recent searches. Secondly, I'll click on the Facebook bookmark. I can see that I am logged in and my feeds are displayed. As a recap before moving on, I'm simply demonstrating that my normal browsing activity for websites which I regularly use isn't affected. The fact that I can see self-contextual BBC Weather and Facebook content is down to the cookies which I have in Firefox. I'll now close it down. So all is done and dusted in my primary browser. I'll now move on to my secondary browser. I personally recommend using an app called DuckDuckGo as the secondary browser on Apple and Android mobile devices, and the Brave browser in this role on Windows, as you'll see me using here in a moment. However, almost any suitably configured browser could be chosen for this purpose. By way of example, if you choose Google Chrome as your primary browser, you can quite legitimately use Apple Safari as your secondary browser, or vice versa. So I'm starting my Brave secondary browser. The most important consideration of my secondary browser is that it's suitably configured. The first key aspect is that it's set as the default browser, such that any web links from external applications are opened in it. The second key aspect is that all browsing material, be it history or cookies, is deleted upon exit. I've used the YouTube description area beneath this video to record snippets of advice, so there's no need to take any notes while you're viewing this video. There's a link to download a PDF document which I've written, such that you have something permanent to refer to. In Brave, I'll browse to the garbage.com website. This is just an example of a random website, whereby it can be seen that I have a cookie challenge to deal with. I'll confidently click on the accept option presented by the cookie acknowledgement prompt without giving it much more thought. I'll now surf to another new website, in this case reddit.com. And I'll again click on the accept option on the cookie acknowledgement prompt when it makes its appearance. I'm now going to perform a web search. My own personal preference is to use the DuckDuckGo.com search engine, which you can see now, rather than the ubiquitous Google.com. I'll type get rich quick. and see what results are returned. I'll click on one of the results which looks plausible. The sole reason I'm demonstrating this is to emphasise using the secondary browser for all web searches rather than the reflexive behaviour of using your primary browser. The final demonstration is to click on a link in an email. So I'll open my email app and you can see that I have an email message with a web link waiting to be clicked on. Upon doing so, it automatically opens the web page in Brave. This exercise is purely to illustrate that the default browser application configuration specifying my secondary browser is working as expected. To illustrate how my web surfing activity is recorded, I'll review the browser activity history. Please be patient. My web surfing activity to garbage.com, reddit.com and rehabilitationmatters.com websites can clearly be seen, as well as my DuckDuckGo searches for getting rich quick. I'll now close Brave to trigger the deletion of all browsing content and then reopen it. So I'm opening up Brave. I'll now bring up the browsing history again. I can see that it's been completely purged. In combination with this, all of my cookies have been deleted, which was the principal objective of this exercise. Unfortunately, this isn't a particularly visually impressive exercise. However, if you were to yourself look into your browser history, you might be surprised to find that everywhere you've surfed in the last few weeks or months is displayed. After the initial Big Brother shock has subsided, I should tell you that you won't even see the wealth of cookie material which is also recorded, but I can assure you that it is there. The dual browser approach can be considered as simply as: continue with your primary browser for regular use when accessing familiar websites, and use the secondary browser for everything else, be it accessing new websites or performing web searches. You can also mitigate browser cookie privacy concerns solely with your primary browser by using something called incognito mode. I personally find this a little more onerous to remember than having separate browsers. However, if you find that my dual browser approach feels a little clumsy, I'd certainly suggest that you look into how incognito mode could be used to achieve similar privacy and security goals. As stated earlier, there's a link in the YouTube comments area where you can download a PDF containing instructions for configuring the requisite DuckDuckGo app settings on Apple and Android mobile devices, as well as similar guidance for configuring the Brave browser on Windows. I must state that the dual browser approach doesn't negate the need to be vigilant when clicking on web links on websites or in applications. If you do find yourself having opened an unexpected website, you should immediately close the browser to flush away history and cookies. You can then reopen it and commence browsing activity afresh. I'm not suggesting that dual browsers is the best solution for everyone. What I can say is that I personally use this approach, and I hope it's worthy of your consideration. I'm certainly not claiming that using dual browsers is a world-changing event, akin to the invention of sliced bread. I'm now going to veer a little off topic onto internet security in general for a moment. The strongest weapon you possess in dealing with threats is common sense. When you're browsing, if something doesn't feel quite right, stop it or ignore it and move on to something else. You can then forget about it in 5 seconds flat. As far as financial enticements are concerned, I believe in what I call the value pyramid whenever a marketing campaign suggests they can make me rich. It goes like this. At the top of the pyramid is self, then family, followed by community, then country, and finally there's everyone else. I believe that if someone or some organisation has knowledge of a simple, risk-free method of making lots of money, they'd observe the value pyramid of self, family, community, etc. The last, and certainly the least important, is the great worldwide mass of unknown people. By way of example, if you, the viewer, knew of some get-rich-quick magic dust, I wouldn't expect you to sprinkle any of it in my direction. So, back onto my main theme again. There'll inevitably be new websites which you find yourself repeatedly accessing in the secondary browser, whereby every restart results in you losing useful settings. When this happens, you'll want to change tack going forwards to opening them in your primary browser such that any settings which you configure remain persistent, and perhaps bookmarking them. And that's it. I'm finished. Simples, innit?